Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kristie. How are you?
I am, surviving the very last week of the semester. It's finals. So
Oh yeah. Yeah.
fun around here, but it's good.
This is
It's
the
good.
week that I have like 2 weeks where it's like grading and then prepping for two new courses this summer.
Yeah, I have a little bit of break before I have to have those courses ready. So I get some time to prep.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's a lot back to back.
Just
But that will be me next year.
yeah.
So
So just for everybody who thinks that we get these really big vacations, we don't.
and
There's
we
no
really
such
don't get
thing.
vacations because we're working on our time off.
We are.
Some of the stuff that doesn't always have time in the schedule. So
Hey,
we just
edit.
may not come to an office to work. We might get to work from home or do, stuff at midnight instead of at 8 a.m. So
Yes. I definitely like working on my couch
yeah,
more.
it's so much more comfortable than my office chair.
So
Um,
much more. I also love that this green screen, if you're watching, it keeps like making my bun disappear. It's kind of funny.
that is funny. Well, before we get started, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to send us information about things you want us to talk about. Our ways to contact us are you could do information at playtherapyspace.com, or you can contact Maggie or I directly. You can do Maggie at playtherapyspace.com or Kristie at playtherapyspace.com.
We love
Gotta
your
get that in
ideas.
the beginning.
Yeah, I know. I hope that we can start doing some trainings, maybe some training videos, some materials.
Well, we
Um,
want to know what you guys need or you feel is really important because Maggie and I can always come up with content, but if it doesn't suit your needs or it's not feeling connected to you, we want to know those things too. We would like to share or have discussions about. We might not have answers for you, but maybe we could discuss that would help you facilitate an answer or get you on the right direction to finding an answer.
yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we thought about talking about is supervision
Yes.
and how to find a supervisor because it's a lot.
Well, and
And
it's to me, it's one of the most important steps of your play therapy journey or your licensing journey is finding the right supervisor for you. And I've had lots of former supervisees or people, colleagues in the field who have not had great supervision experiences. And so if we can help you think about things that you might want to
well,
process or
I think you
think
and I's
about.
experience was very unique because most of our supervision was done during our program. So I don't know about you, but I finished all my LPC hours and my RPT hours in my doc program.
I did, but I worked really hard to do that. That was
Yes.
not the norm, but I was able to complete them all in my doctoral studies.
Hmm.
And I did have an outside supervisor on
Oh, you
top of my
did.
doctoral studies.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I did have a little bit of like the community feel of trying to find someone. Mine was assigned to me and I landed with a good one. But
Hmm.
sometimes it is, like roulette. Is your agency supervisor going to be the right fit for you or have the experience and knowledge to help support your growth and development? I think in particular to play therapy.
I think that's where it's hard. And I've noticed, I think I also find myself in a push pull. So I supervise a lot of former students, and that's how they find me because they've had class with me. And it's hard because I don't want to push child centered on anyone. I want them to be able to explore and process.
Mhm.
And also, I recognize a lot of times they're like pulling, like they're trying so hard to get all of this information, but much of the information just kind of juxtaposes each other. And then it gets really confusing. And so trying to kind of be like, okay, where is the intentionality in this? What is the purpose of this? And kind of balancing that and wanting to be positive and growth oriented. It's quite a balance as a supervisor. You don't want a I personally would not want a supervisor who told me I was doing everything wrong. I would probably feel super discouraged.
Yeah. And I think so it's going to change how I talk about supervision. So if you're wanting someone who is child-centered, person-centered, right? We find those as kind of like lucky charms in my community. We have a few, but a lot of people practice from a variety of theoretical models, orientations, modalities, right? And so to find someone that is really going to facilitate child-centered for you sometimes is harder to find in the
Yeah.
community. And even if you highlight that you do want to stay child-centered, what I've heard is they feel pressured, or some of the guidance that is given is really pushing into other modalities and they're having to like really stay strong. And as you're still growing and developing, sometimes that's hard to know, especially as a brand new play therapist, really, well, what is child-centered? And so
Mhm.
I actually do a lot more community based supervision. I don't do much. I just do a little. Typically for the child-centered credentialing, for the
Mhm.
credential child-centered is where a lot of my supervisees come from.
Mhm.
And yeah, they've had very mixed experiences prior to really focusing in on child-centered.
It's interesting. Even so, we talk about how hard it is if you're entering into spaces that aren't necessarily as grounded or aware of or whatever about child centered, and how hard it is as a new therapist. And I just want to normalize it's hard for experienced therapists because I've had that experience multiple times. And Kristie was on my speed dial last year where I was working in an agency where I was supposed to be the one coming in to do the trainings and do this stuff. And like, this is how we do these things, and getting pushback left and
Yeah.
right. This isn't evidence based. It's not this, it's not that. This is more evidence based. I'm like, hold up, right? And really questioning myself. And I was thinking about this last night, actually, that we should probably have Dr. Regine Chung, right? I want to make sure I got her last name right, but I know her as Regine. But she did this great 2-year study of CCPT with nonverbal autistic children. And that was a big pushback last year, as child centered can't be done with autistic children and it's overwhelming. And so it's very easy to, especially if you're non-confrontational like I am, and also perhaps a little bit not sure you have the language to share your knowledge. It
Mhm.
can feel really difficult in those times to be like, no, I know that this works
Yeah.
and this is why it works. And so I just kind of want to share with everybody, if I'm having this experience after the level of training that I received and the space where I received that training, and after being in practice for almost 15 years, I can't imagine how difficult it would be to go into a space when you've graduated and try and hold your own. It's really hard.
Which is why I think supervision is really important, right? To have someone that you can bounce off or say, all this stuff is coming up, right? I feel like I'm not sure how to respond. Can we work together in supervision to come up with the words of validating what I'm doing in this moment,
Mhm.
that really supports my clinical approach?
Yeah.
Because it's frustrating for me to keep hearing is that child-centered play therapy is not evidence-based when we have so many research studies that support child-centered as evidence-based. We have multiple organizations that identify child-centered a promising intervention, which is always the first step of evidence-based. And it's when you get to promising, they're stating that you have strong support, right? You can't get that without strong research support. And so I think I've come to the conclusion that we have to stop fighting this idea, is it evidence-based, and just make the claim it's evidence-based, not because we don't have stuff to back it up, but we actually do have stuff to back up. Is child-centered, is CPRT, are these things evidence-based? We have lots of research that shows the support for this model.
Yes.
And if other people, and I share how I feel in those moments when they're like, it's not as evidence-based as this model, or it's not as a lot of that stuff is what they're claiming is evidence-based is for adults and adolescent, but we don't have a lot of kids modalities that are saying that this is the strongest evidence base for this. I sometimes lean in when it comes up for me to like, I can hear your passion for the model you practice from. Talk to me more about, like the importance of that for you. And then I try to flip, I feel the same way about child-centered play therapy. I can show you research after research study, about its effectiveness. And so instead of combating it, I try to really listen and actively listen to why they feel really rooted or tied into this approach. And typically this is how we've done it. And if we're coming in and trying to do something differently, that might be the rationale for why it's not as evidence-based, but I don't know.
Yeah. So I do think it's important as you're seeking out a supervisor to be
Mhm.
aware of what it is that you're looking for. I
Yeah.
think you and I are probably pretty straightforward when people come and ask us for supervision. I ask for their information on their theoretical orientation. I ask for information about like where their passion lies, what they're hoping to gain from this
Mhm.
experience beyond just licensure or accreditation or credentialing.
Yeah.
I know I've had these conversations with Dr. Harvey Peters and several of our faculty because we use an individual based supervision model. And I like triadic. I like having two people in the space because they can see how other people operate and how they're thinking. And I think it gives in depth, but that's not always the way it is.
Yeah, I like both.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some individual works better. And I think for others, triadic is a good approach. I think you can learn a lot when you have someone else in supervision as you're watching other videos and stuff. Though I find it takes longer. I don't feel like I can get as much in supervision in 1 hour with triadic
It's
as
easier in an hour and a half.
yeah, I do normally do an hour and a half. And so it's just dependent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what we're doing. But the other thing, so Maggie talked about like kind of what we ask for. I often think about what should my supervisees be asking us about.
Mm-hmm.
So I encourage them to think of this as an interview to kind of get a feel for how supervision is going to go. So when I talk to new graduates or people about to graduate, this is some of this advice that I give to our outgoing students or kind of new people in the field. I'll say, this is your chance to get a feel what your supervision is going to be like. How do you mesh with this person? Do you feel like this person is going to support you in the ways that you need to be supported? So things you might want to ask are, what is your theoretical orientation from that you practice from? What models are you comfortable supervising? What are your expectations of me as a supervisee? How often will I be evaluated? What are the styles of evaluation? Are they informal? Are they formal? Is supervision more administrative? Is it more clinical based? PT has standards that we need to follow as supervisors about watching video and some other stuff. So if you have a really strong administrative person, like how are we going to balance the administrative side of things and
Mm-hmm.
the supervisory side, the clinical case management side of things, and actually watching and my skill development and those components.
Mm-hmm.
How familiar are you, if it's an APT supervisor, talk to me about how you work through the phases as a supervisor. What does that look like for you? How would our time be spent? Do I have options of individual versus triadic or group supervision? If I have some type of deficit, right? If there's an area that is really a weakness for me, how are what ways do you support previous supervisees when they have weaknesses? Trying to think of some of the other questions. But I think those are my main questions. How much do you charge?
How much you charge is a big one. And that's one I
And what does that
struggle
mean?
with.
What does that mean?
Mhm.
And what does that entail? Because, right? So if we start off as individual, or if I have the choice of triadic or group, are there different fees for that? How long is supervision, right? Is it in person? Is it virtual? Some of those are things you do want to ask along the way.
Mhm. I really struggle with how much to charge. It
Yeah.
makes me.
Yeah,
And
that's a whole different stream of like how much
right.
should you be paying for supervision.
Well,
Because
and
I
I
think
think
it's dependent of your community. I think there's a lot of things you need to be thoughtful of. Are you are you using them for multiple licensure
right.
purposes and credentialing? So are you doing both your state licensure, if that's LCAS, if that's LPC, LCHMC, whatever your acronym for your licensure? Are they supervising you for RPT, or are they
Mhm.
just supervising you for RPT and not your state licensure? And are they credentialed in other areas? So would they be able to supervise you in EMDR, in
Right.
CCPT or CPRT, Adlerian play? There's so many things you need to know because I do think that has an impact on how people are charging and what they're billing for.
Hmm.
And how do you do payment? What does payment look like?
Hmm. I also think it's really important, and it's been hard to get my supervisees to bring in videos. It's really tough.
Really?
Yeah. And
Hmm.
part of it is because a lot of them are in the schools. So
Oh,
there's
yeah.
like an extra layer. It's easier when they're in a practice setting.
Hmm.
And I get it. Schools are hard and you have to get permission from the school and the district and then the families. But it's so helpful because when you're recounting what happened, it's difficult to know exactly how that's engaging. And I recognize as a, when I was a supervisee and a student, the recording scared the bejesus out of me.
Yeah.
I hated it.
Did you?
And it was so helpful.
I know. I talk about that all the time. I still record some of my sessions.
I have a whole thing because all mine are on DVDs. And even then, it was like, I remember having a conversation with Dr. D. Ray because we had to finalize. So, like, you had to like record and then press this other thing. And inevitably, I would never finalize. And she was like, do you think this is you unconsciously trying not to watch videos? And it's quite possible that that's exactly what was going on. I think also you're running from one place to the next. And, but it's frustrating now looking back because I have all of these DVDs that you can't watch.
Oh man,
Hmm.
that does stink.
And also, no one has a DVD player anymore. So,
Well, my
and they're so
understanding is I
old.
don't think you can finalize them on just anything. You have to finalize
Mm-mm.
them on the device you record it. You could always go back and get them finalized.
Because I asked if
Device.
I could go back at UNT when we went for our CCPT and
And they got whole
CPRT
new
trainings.
systems.
They have a whole new system. So
Yeah.
now everybody else is done digitally, at least at our school. And you can't keep their like erased after the semester.
Oh, interesting.
Mhm.
I think we can keep ours for a while, but maybe after we hit so many hours, they start to delete to build. I'm not really sure what our model is here, but I will say around the video recording, let's talk about why we video record our
Yeah.
sessions, because I think
Yeah.
that's an important place to start. So
A great point.
our perception and reality are often vastly different. So how we're perceiving what's happening and in play, things move so quickly. And if I get stuck in my head, which is what I find a lot of beginning play therapists, as they're thinking about how they should respond, what they should say, right? They do get a little disconnected to what's happening in the moment. And I'll say that's true for me at times when I kind of get thrown a whopper in session, right? I'm like, wow, what should I respond? And my
Hmm.
internal dialogue is preventing me from really staying present in the moment to like pick up on all the little things.
Hmm.
I mean, we miss things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes we have an idea of what's going to happen, or if a kid has played the same thing over and over again for session after session, that it can be challenging for us to stay in the moment without expecting what is coming next.
Yeah.
And so, what recordings help us do is then challenge our perception of what the session was like,
Hmm.
as well as almost be able to remove ourselves one step from being in the moment to watch what is happening. And this is the best way for us to really identify like the subtle little things that maybe we're doing or not doing in session that could help us grow.
Hmm.
It also, when I'm sharing it with my supervisor, it's not just based on my perception. They get to actually hear my perception, get to watch in reality of what happened, and then help maybe me shift my perspective or like highlight, okay, I'm going to pause it right here. What did you just see happen? Right.
Hmm.
so that we can kind of walk through the steps, or let's talk about why you chose to set a limit here, right? When you came in, or as we were like prepping for the video, you said to me, blah, blah, blah. Now that you watched it again, talk to me about if that's why we set a limit, didn't set a limit, kind of talking through it that way. And then I can also fine tune on our own body language, or I'm
Mhm.
noticing something's happening for you right now. Talk to me what's going on. Your body seems really stiff. You look a little less natural to me. Is something going on for you? Which can then help, right, for self-awareness. And
Yes.
when we look from a child-centered perspective, that's so important because those go to the core therapist conditions of congruence, unconditional positive regard, and empathic understanding and communication back to the client. Because if I'm
Mhm.
getting triggered or activated, then maybe I'm not responding to actually what the client said, but my response internally, and I'm projecting or protecting or defending or something in that moment. So
Right.
that's where video really helps me. What about for you, Maggie?
I mean, for all of those same reasons. And I also like looking at how the child responds. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, so let's pause for a second. So you were picking up this, and what are you noticing in their body language? What are you noticing in their tone?
Mm-hmm.
And really kind of helping hone in on that because it is a two-way street. How is this impacting? I also think, in addition to videos, which require a lot of vulnerability,
Mm-hmm.
is the more like supervision isn't therapy. It's different. And I think that a lot of growth can happen when the supervisee and the supervisor are able to explore some things that might be impacting the way in which you're engaging because we are human beings and we have our own stuff and that's gonna be present, right? You try really hard to separate those things. And so I really like doing sand trays to explore kind of what their ideas and engagement and what their process and what they're experiencing. So I like to do those throughout. And sometimes that's supervisees really struggle with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it can feel really scary. I also think, of course, culture and identities play into that and fears about what that vulnerability or how that vulnerability might be used against them because it can feel like that sometimes, right? If you're telling me that you're so overwhelmed that X, Y, and Z are happening, we're probably going to have a conversation of like, okay, how are you protecting your clients? Is it time to take a step back for a second? What does that look like to take care of yourself? I think that can feel really scary and sometimes really punitive for people, but that's not the purpose of doing it. It really is. I think that if you're going to be a supervisor, and I think you and I are pretty strong on this, or a counselor, educator, or a trainer, it's because you believe in this so much that you want everyone to be able to provide not just ethical, but effective and quality. And so sometimes that you do have to explore yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that's scary for people.
Yeah. The other thing I do in supervision, so once we get started, we have conversations about how do you ask to record?
That's a great idea.
What are your views of record? As a
Yeah.
supervisee, what are your thoughts when I say I want you to record sessions, right? Because I think if we can get those out in the open, you're more likely practice asking people to video record, right? Talk to your
Mm-hmm.
partner, talk to your roommate, talk to a colleague at work, play through it. Watch yourself in the mirror as you're asking these things. Because we can inadvertently and subconsciously encourage clients to say
Not.
no to video recording because of our own apprehension or our own anxiety. So I do that as part of one of my initial supervision
That's a
sessions,
great idea.
especially for people I've never met before. So like, what is
Mm-hmm.
your comfort level with recording? How are you going to respond if a kid asks, why is it being recorded, right? What is this for? Let's talk through all those things so you're prepped ahead of time instead of fumbling,
Mm-hmm.
feeling super anxious about it. And the reality is, the more you do it, the less you even notice that it's happening. And the same is
Mm-hmm.
for your clients. Maybe the first session is a little awkward, but like as it becomes just part of the environmental space that they're practicing in, the easier it is. We also talk about, where do you put your recording device? What are you recording on?
Right. When you were in the schools, in the elementary schools and graduate school, we did you use those little GoPros?
Yes, except do you know how much memory they take?
Oh, really?
They're huge because they're recording at a higher, I forget what it's called, like a
Oh,
PSI value or whatever it is. They take up a ton of memory.
I liked them because you couldn't see the video as you were recording.
Mhm.
And that's something I talk with supervisees a lot about and students is like, if you're recording on a laptop or a phone and they can see, it could be really distracting. And then sometimes they'll turn it around so that you can't see the recording as it's happening. But then they're like, but then I don't have a clock. So things to
Yeah,
consider of like, where do you have a clock in your room so that you're not reliant on your phone for that? And where can you place the recording device, which it is really easy on our phones, but then how is that protected? Right? Because this is confidential
mhm,
and it's protected by HIPAA. And so,
yeah,
what are you going to do to make sure that you are keeping this in a safe space that is password encoded or encrypted that
yeah.
you can't get to? How long are you going to keep the recording?
Yeah.
All of
I
these conversations.
Yeah, if they're using a laptop or an Apple device, we'll watch it, then I delete it. Now, one thing I've learned about Macs is Macs have a reserve backup, so you have to make sure it's also deleted out of your library so you don't have confidential medium and supervision. What is the financial cost to do that? Is that
Right.
worth it?
There's so much that goes into this that you really have to be thoughtful and prepare and aware of like how you're going to keep all of this information safe and confidential and in alignment with the laws
Yep.
and
The only other thing is if you are not part of the agency that your supervisee is working from,
mhm,
right? Make sure they're notifying their director, right? So if you're someone going into supervision, make sure you get permission from your director to have an outside supervisor.